The comforting aroma of freshly baked bread drifted through the still, dark streets of historic Savannah as Sarah unlocked the heavy wooden doors of Mary's Delights. Her small but capable hands had been tirelessly kneading dough since 4 o'clock in the morning, carrying on a family tradition that meant everything to her. A floral apron, inherited from her grandmother Mary, was dusted with a fine layer of white flour as she moved gracefully around the warm, familiar kitchen. Whispering soft measurements to herself, she added a pinch of extra yeast, relying entirely on the cherished recipes she had memorized over the years. This cozy little establishment in the heart of the historic district was Sarah's entire universe, representing her proudest heritage and her most daunting daily challenge. Stacks of unpaid bills cluttered the vintage oak counter, and a recent notice regarding a substantial rent increase felt like a heavy anchor dragging her down. Catherine, the very first customer of the morning, pushed the glass door open, causing the antique brass bell above to chime a cheerful greeting. The elderly woman adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, her wrinkled face lighting up with a warm smile as the sweet scent of cinnamon enveloped her completely. Sarah returned the genuine smile immediately, carefully slicing a generous portion of a steaming cake that had just emerged from the old brick oven. She offered the warm plate to Catherine, explaining that it was a brand-new apple and cinnamon recipe she was testing for the upcoming autumn season. The new creation was Sarah's desperate attempt to revitalize their traditional menu and attract more tourists, without losing the soulful essence that made the bakery special. Meanwhile, across the bustling city, inside a towering glass skyscraper, Luke Miller was meticulously reviewing financial reports on his sleek, silver laptop monitor. His minimalist corner office perfectly mirrored his cold, efficient personality, entirely devoid of any personal touches except for a single photograph of his mother resting on the glass desk. A voice crackled through the intercom as his dedicated assistant reminded him that his first executive board meeting was scheduled to begin in exactly 15 minutes. Luke adjusted his tailored Italian silk tie and double-checked the towering revenue projections, knowing that his decisions at Miller Enterprises controlled millions of dollars in urban investments. Suddenly, his phone vibrated with a text message from his mother, gently reminding him that tomorrow was her birthday and she wished for a simple morning coffee together. A heavy frown creased Luke's forehead as a wave of guilt washed over him, realizing he had completely forgotten about his own mother's special day. Over the past few years, ever since he ruthlessly took the reins of the family real estate empire, his visits home had become increasingly rare and brief. While riding the silent elevator down to the boardroom, a highly unusual and sentimental idea suddenly flickered to life in the back of his mind. Instead of purchasing another expensive but incredibly impersonal designer gift, he resolved to find a handmade treat, remembering how his mother always nostalgically praised traditional bakeries. During his brief lunch break, amidst endless conference calls, Luke continuously scrolled through his phone, actively searching for highly rated artisan bakeries hidden within the city. A modest, old-fashioned pastry shop located in the historic preservation district immediately caught his eye due to its overwhelmingly positive reviews and charming aesthetic. The uploaded photographs displayed meticulously crafted desserts, boasting a rustic, homemade touch that instantly transported him back to the innocent, carefree days of his childhood. Late in the afternoon, completely abandoning his strict daily routine, Luke navigated his luxury sports car through the narrow, cobblestone streets, lined with weeping willows. The golden sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement when he finally parked directly in front of Mary's Delights. Peering through the large front window, he observed a young woman completely absorbed in decorating a magnificent layered cake, with an impressive level of dedication. Sarah wiped her floury hands on her apron and looked up in absolute surprise as the heavy door creaked open, admitting an imposing, sharply dressed stranger. The man's immaculate, dark navy suit profoundly contrasted with the humble, flower-dusted surroundings of the bakery, making him stand out like a sore thumb. Their eyes locked for a fleeting second, and an inexplicable silent spark seemed to charge the air between them in that exact moment. Luke cleared his throat, his deep, resonant voice easily filling the quiet room, as he announced he needed a very special, traditional cake for his mother's birthday tomorrow. Sarah maintained a purely professional demeanor, asking about his mother's favorite flavors while actively trying not to feel intimidated by his incredibly commanding presence. They quickly agreed on a classic recipe, and as he handed her his gold-embossed business card, their fingertips lightly brushed, setting the wheels of fate into motion. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the bakery long before the sun even considered rising over the horizon, her mind buzzing with unexpected anticipation. She dedicated an extraordinary amount of care to the specific cake Luke had ordered, meticulously crafting a traditional walnut and dulce de leche masterpiece. The delicate frosting was elegantly decorated with intricate buttercream flowers and tiny, edible gold flakes, achieving a perfect balance between high-end sophistication and warm, homemade comfort. Rachel, her loyal and observant employee, teasingly pointed out that Sarah had never spent so much continuous time perfecting a single, ordinary customer's order before. Sarah desperately attempted to hide the sudden bright blush spreading across her cheeks, insisting that she merely wanted the important businessman's mother to have a wonderful birthday. However, as she carefully piped the final decorative borders, her thoughts inevitably drifted back to the brief but intense encounter from the previous evening. There was something deeply intriguing about Luke Miller, a fleeting shadow of profound loneliness hiding just behind his incredibly polished and intimidating corporate facade. The brass bell interrupted her reverie, announcing the arrival of the morning rush as the irresistible fragrance of brewing coffee and fresh pastries filled the bustling neighborhood. Barbara, an elegantly dressed local woman who had frequented the bakery for over 3 decades, joyfully praised Sarah's incredible carrot cake from the day before. The older woman then curiously mentioned seeing a very expensive, imported vehicle parked out front yesterday, wondering aloud if wealthy newcomers were finally discovering their hidden gem. Before Sarah could offer a proper explanation, the door swung open to reveal Luke, looking absolutely striking in a perfectly tailored, dark charcoal morning suit. His piercing gaze immediately scanned the crowded room, locking onto Sarah behind the wooden counter, a small, genuine smile noticeably softening his typically stern, uncompromising features. Sarah felt her pulse quicken significantly as she quickly retrieved the carefully boxed walnut cake from the back kitchen and presented it to him. Luke's eyes widened slightly in genuine admiration as he examined the stunning dessert, realizing it was an absolute work of art that perfectly captured his vague request. He quietly murmured that it was extraordinary and that his mother would undoubtedly cherish such a beautifully thoughtful and nostalgic birthday surprise. Sarah proudly explained that the walnuts provided a classic texture, while the rich dulce de leche was made entirely from scratch, using her beloved grandmother's secret recipe. Luke inhaled deeply, allowing the sweet, comforting aroma to briefly wash away the endless, crushing stress of his demanding corporate responsibilities and pending deadlines. He softly confessed that the smell reminded him of peaceful Sunday mornings from his childhood, a time before his life became consumed by endless board meetings. Recognizing the subtle sorrow in his voice, Sarah gently asked if he and his family still managed to maintain those beautiful, heartwarming weekend traditions. Luke's expression immediately closed off, and he admitted with a heavy sigh that his relentless work schedule had unfortunately taken over every aspect of his existence. A comfortable yet highly charged silence settled firmly between them, accompanied only by the soft clinking of ceramic coffee cups and the low hum of neighborhood chatter. As Luke pulled out a sleek, black credit card to settle the surprisingly modest bill, Sarah made a sudden, impulsive decision, driven by pure kindness. She quickly packed a small, charming bag of freshly baked butter cookies, handing them over the counter, completely free of charge as a special gift. She offered a radiant smile, firmly instructing him to share the sweet treats with his mother while they enjoyed their much-needed birthday breakfast together. Luke appeared genuinely moved by the unexpected generosity, graciously thanking her before slowly turning to leave, pausing for a fraction of a second at the door. He seemed to genuinely struggle with an unspoken thought, wanting to say something more, but ultimately offered a polite nod and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Sarah watched through the glass as he climbed into his luxurious car, stubbornly fighting a sharp, confusing pang of disappointment that she refused to fully acknowledge. Rachel nudged her gently, letting out a dramatic sigh, and playfully noting that the handsome, wealthy CEO had clearly left a lasting impression on their hard-working baker. To Sarah's immense surprise, the brief morning encounter was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of an unexpected and beautiful routine. A few days later, Luke returned to the bakery, his tie loosened and his posture significantly more relaxed than during their initial formal meeting. He enthusiastically reported that the walnut cake was a monumental success, and the butter cookies had easily been the absolute highlight of his mother's special day. With a slightly nervous energy that completely contrasted with his usual commanding boardroom presence, he politely asked if Sarah would ever consider joining him for a cup of coffee. That simple, hesitant invitation quickly blossomed into a wonderfully long, laughter-filled lunch at a cozy French bistro located just 2 blocks away from the bakery. Sarah was genuinely amazed by how effortlessly their conversation flowed, discovering that the notoriously ruthless businessman was actually an incredibly attentive and thoughtful listener. She passionately shared the story of how she had unexpectedly taken over the family business at 22 years old when her grandmother suddenly fell ill. Luke listened with absolute fascination, deeply captivated by the pure, unadulterated passion she held for her craft, a stark contrast to his own heavily calculated corporate world. He confessed that he had originally dreamed of becoming a visionary architect, hoping to build beautiful spaces, but family obligations had ruthlessly dragged him into real estate acquisition. As the weeks quickly turned into months, Luke's visits to the historic neighborhood became a cherished, regular part of his otherwise chaotic and stressful weekly schedule. He began to deeply appreciate the small, beautiful details of life that he had previously ignored: the warmth of fresh bread, the genuine smiles, and unhurried mornings. The regular customers quickly noticed the blossoming romance, often exchanging knowing, delighted glances whenever the tall, handsome executive walked through the chiming bakery door. One particularly beautiful Friday evening, Luke invited Sarah to dine at an incredibly exclusive, high-altitude restaurant that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. The romantic atmosphere was absolutely perfect, until Luke's phone vibrated violently on the table, displaying an urgent, highly confidential message from his lead project manager. A dark, troubled shadow instantly crossed his face, entirely ruining his joyful mood, though he quickly forced a tight smile and claimed it was nothing important. Sarah intuitively sensed his deep unease, gently asking if he was okay, but he stubbornly deflected the question, claiming he was merely tired from a long week. What Sarah could not possibly know was that the urgent message contained final demolition schedules for the massive Savannah Heights commercial shopping mall project. This multi-million-dollar corporate endeavor required the complete acquisition and absolute destruction of several historic city blocks, including the exact location of Mary's Delights. Luke stared across the candlelit table at the beautiful woman who had just breathed life back into his cold world, feeling a crushing weight in his chest. He desperately wanted to confess the terrible truth, to explain that his own company was the shadowy entity quietly buying up all her struggling neighbors' properties. During the quiet drive home, they passed directly in front of the darkened bakery, its hand-painted vintage sign proudly standing as a testament to local history. Sarah gazed at the old building with immense love, softly whispering that her grandmother believed a bakery was the living, beating heart of any true neighborhood. Luke gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned completely white, torn between his lifelong corporate duties and the woman he was rapidly falling for. When he finally walked her to her door, she offered a sweet, lingering kiss that tasted of pure hope, leaving him absolutely drowning in silent guilt. The corporate boardroom was thick with suffocating tension early Monday morning as Luke's financial director brilliantly projected the final acquisition maps onto the massive wall screen. Robert, the ruthless financial lead, proudly announced that 80% of the historic properties had been successfully purchased, leaving only one stubborn block remaining. A bright red laser pointer circled the exact location of Sarah's beloved bakery, highlighting it as the absolute center of their planned luxury food court. Frank Moore, the powerful majority shareholder, loudly demanded that they aggressively escalate their pressure tactics to quickly force the remaining, stubborn business owners to sell. Meanwhile, back at the bustling bakery, Rachel rushed into the kitchen with her eyes wide, frantically waving her mobile phone in Sarah's flour-covered face. She had just read a shocking, viral post on a community forum detailing a massive corporate plan to entirely bulldoze their historic district for a mega mall. Sarah felt the blood drain completely from her face as she read the name of the aggressive development company responsible for the impending destruction: Miller Enterprises. A sudden, sickening wave of realization crashed over her as all the mysterious phone calls and Luke's constant, uncomfortable evasions finally made terrible, devastating sense. The antique bell chimed, and a distressed group of local business owners hurried inside, seeking solace and leadership from the young, highly respected baker. James, the elderly owner of the corner grocery store, and Zelda, the neighborhood florist, were practically in tears over the aggressive buyout letters they had received. They desperately needed a place to organize a resistance, and Sarah, pushing aside her own shattering heartbreak, immediately offered her bakery as their official meeting ground. Just as the angry community members began drafting protest signs, Sarah spotted a familiar, sleek luxury car slowly parking on the opposite side of the street. Later that evening, after the last frustrated neighbor had finally gone home, Luke quietly pushed open the bakery door, looking exhausted and profoundly defeated. Sarah did not bother to greet him. She simply stood behind the flour-dusted counter, her eyes blazing with a mixture of intense anger and profound sorrow. She demanded to know the truth without any corporate spin, asking point-blank if his company was the one actively trying to destroy her family's entire legacy. Luke closed his eyes tightly, taking a deep, ragged breath before softly uttering a single word of confirmation that effectively shattered her remaining hopes. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy, broken only by the steady, rhythmic ticking of the antique wall clock that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. She bitterly asked how long he had known, her voice remarkably steady, despite the hurricane of furious emotions violently tearing through her chest. He admitted that the project had been planned long before they ever met, but desperately swore that his feelings for her had drastically changed his perspective. Sarah let out a hollow, humorless laugh, questioning how he could possibly sit in her home, eat her food, and date her while plotting her ruin. Luke stepped forward, his hands raised in a pleading gesture, desperately begging for a single chance to explain his complicated attempts to alter the board's decision. But Sarah firmly held up her hand, forcing him to stop in his tracks, absolutely refusing to let him use their fragile romance as a convenient shield. She sharply ordered him to leave the premises immediately, stating that she needed to prepare a fresh batch of dough and had no time for liars. Luke hesitated, his heart breaking as he looked at her tear-stained face, before finally turning around and walking out into the cold, unforgiving night. The following 2 weeks were an absolute nightmare for Sarah, filled with sleepless nights, stressful community meetings, and a constant, heavy dread hanging over the neighborhood. Luke desperately attempted to contact her countless times, leaving dozens of heartfelt voicemails and sending long, pleading messages that she stubbornly refused to read or answer. One rainy morning, a sleek corporate courier delivered a thick, official envelope directly to the bakery counter, containing a formal purchase offer from Miller Enterprises. The financial amount listed on the crisp white paper was absolutely staggering, offering roughly 3 times the actual market value of the aging, historic building. Thomas, a retired university historian who practically lived at the bakery, carefully reviewed the lucrative offer over a cup of black coffee and shook his head. He wisely noted that the massive corporation was clearly trying to divide and conquer the neighborhood by throwing irresistible amounts of money at the loudest voices. However, Sarah coldly placed the official document into a dark drawer, absolutely refusing to trade her grandmother's precious legacy for any amount of corporate blood money. Instead, she threw herself entirely into organizing the neighborhood resistance, contacting local news stations, and gathering hundreds of physical signatures for a massive preservation petition. Unbeknownst to Sarah, Luke was fighting an equally brutal and exhausting war inside the glass walls of his towering corporate headquarters across the city. He forcefully presented a highly detailed, radically altered architectural plan to the board of directors, suggesting they fully integrate the historic buildings into the new mall. Frank Moore loudly ridiculed the idea, arguing that preserving crumbling brick facades would cost millions in structural reinforcement and completely ruin the modern, sleek aesthetic. The board meeting devolved into a vicious shouting match, leaving Luke entirely isolated against a powerful group of greedy investors who only cared about maximum profit. Realizing that his corporate title was utterly useless against the overwhelming greed of the shareholders, Luke made a shocking, incredibly drastic decision that stunned the financial world. He officially resigned from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Miller Enterprises, effectively severing all his powerful ties to the family's aggressive real estate empire. But he did not stop there. He quietly liquidated all his personal company stock, transferring a massive fortune into a newly established, independent historic preservation trust. This bold, incredibly risky maneuver was specifically designed to provide the struggling neighborhood with enough financial backing to legally fight the massive development corporation in court. The shocking news of his sudden resignation spread through the city like wildfire, quickly reaching Sarah while she was aggressively kneading bread dough in the kitchen. Rachel burst through the swinging doors, triumphantly waving the morning newspaper that featured a massive headline detailing Luke's dramatic departure and his newly formed preservation fund. Sarah stood completely frozen, her flour-covered hands trembling as she read the article, her mind violently struggling to process the magnitude of his selfless sacrifice. Before she could fully comprehend the situation, the bakery door chimed, and a highly unexpected visitor confidently strode into the warm, sweet-smelling room. It was Frank Moore himself, looking incredibly uncomfortable in his expensive tailored suit as he politely asked for a private word with the young, defiant baker. He revealed that Luke's dramatic exit and the subsequent negative press had severely damaged the company's public image, forcing the board to reconsider their aggressive strategy. Frank grudgingly presented a brand new set of architectural blueprints, clearly showing Mary's Delights and the surrounding historic shops beautifully preserved and integrated into the design. He offered a formal compromise, promising to fund the preservation if Sarah would publicly endorse the newly revised project and calm the angry, protesting community. The crucial community meeting was held later that evening inside the grand, echoing hall of the historic neighborhood church, packed tightly with anxious, chattering residents. Sarah stood nervously at the front podium, overlooking the sea of familiar faces, holding the revised blueprints that represented a fragile, unexpected bridge between past and future. She took a remarkably deep breath, her voice ringing out clearly as she detailed the revised proposal from Miller Enterprises and the incredible sacrifice Luke had made. She honestly explained that fighting the corporation in court could take years and drain their spirits, whereas this new compromise offered a chance for collaborative growth. Eleanor, a retired schoolteacher who had known the Miller family for decades, slowly stood up, leaning heavily on her carved wooden cane to command attention. She softly reminded the crowd that true progress does not always mean entirely erasing the past, but rather finding a respectful, harmonious way to weave them together. The room erupted into a passionate, sometimes heated debate, with younger business owners eager for the increased foot traffic, while older residents feared losing their quiet charm. Sarah patiently mediated the intense discussion, passionately arguing that their community's soul resided in its people and their shared bonds, not just in the old bricks. She beautifully painted a vivid picture of a future where their traditional shops could thrive alongside modern amenities, drawing tourists while perfectly maintaining their historic dignity. To ensure the corporation kept its promises, she proposed forming a permanent, legally binding neighborhood oversight committee that would have absolute veto power over the final designs. William, a brilliant young architect who had recently quit Miller Enterprises in solidarity with Luke, enthusiastically volunteered his professional services to represent the neighborhood's structural interests. By the end of the grueling 4-hour meeting, a hopeful consensus had miraculously emerged, and the community voted overwhelmingly to accept the heavily modified, integrated development plan. Walking back to the bakery long after midnight, the cool autumn air felt incredibly refreshing against Sarah's exhausted but profoundly relieved and happy face. As she approached her storefront, she spotted a tall, solitary figure quietly sitting on the damp stone steps, illuminated only by the flickering yellow street lamp. Luke looked up, his expensive suits traded for a simple wool sweater and worn jeans, appearing far more grounded and infinitely more human than ever before. He softly apologized for waiting so late, admitting he could not sleep without knowing the final outcome of the community's incredibly important and historic vote. Sarah smiled warmly, the last lingering traces of her previous anger melting away as she gently invited him inside the warm, quiet sanctuary of her bakery. Over steaming mugs of sweet chamomile tea, she eagerly shared the wonderful news of the community's decision to embrace the integrated project and form an oversight committee. Luke's eyes shone with immense pride and profound relief, softly expressing his deep admiration for her incredible leadership and her unyielding dedication to her neighbors. He humbly acknowledged that he still had a mountain of work to do to fully rebuild her trust, but promised he was completely committed to the effort. Sarah reached across the worn wooden table, her flour-dusted fingers gently brushing against his warm hand, signaling a beautiful, tentative beginning to their much-needed healing process. She quietly told him that they would simply take it one day at a time, much like waiting for a perfect batch of dough to slowly rise. The soft, golden light of the oven cast long, dancing shadows across the room as they sat together in comfortable, companionable silence, surrounded by hope. It was the absolute perfect recipe for a new start, blending the bitter struggles of the past with the incredibly sweet, promising possibilities of their shared future. Exactly 1 year later, the grand reopening of the historic neighborhood square was a spectacularly joyous event, filled with vibrant music, laughter, and brilliant autumn sunshine. The massive construction barriers had finally been removed, revealing a breathtaking architectural marvel where sleek, modern glass structures seamlessly embraced the beautifully restored brick facades. Mary's Delights proudly anchored the central courtyard, its vintage charm meticulously preserved, yet boasting a newly expanded kitchen that allowed Sarah to comfortably double her daily production. The fragrant scent of fresh pastries intertwined with the crisp city air, drawing massive crowds of curious tourists and incredibly loyal, lifelong local customers alike. Sarah nervously smoothed her new apron, taking a brief moment to stare proudly at the beautifully framed photograph of her grandmother, hanging prominently on the freshly painted wall. The neighborhood committee had worked tirelessly alongside William and the remaining corporate developers, ensuring every single historical detail, down to the cobblestone walkways, was perfectly respected. Luke walked through the bustling front doors, looking incredibly handsome and deeply relaxed, carrying a massive bouquet of vibrant, blooming sunflowers that brightened the entire room. He was no longer a stressed corporate executive, but rather a passionate, deeply fulfilled consultant for sustainable urban development, working closely with various historical preservation societies. The mayor personally attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, publicly praising the extraordinary collaboration between the fierce local community and the developers as a shining model for the nation. When it was Sarah's turn to speak at the podium, she looked out at the massive sea of faces, locking eyes with Luke, who beamed with absolute pride. She passionately spoke about the enduring power of community, the incredible strength found in unity, and the beautiful magic that happens when tradition bravely shakes hands with progress. The roaring applause echoed through the newly designed square, validating every single tear, sleepless night, and difficult compromise they had endured over the past turbulent year. Later that evening, long after the massive crowds had finally dispersed, and the golden sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, the bakery grew peacefully quiet. Sarah and Luke sat alone at a small, intimate table near the front window, sharing a perfectly baked slice of the famous walnut and dulce de leche cake. Luke reached into his jacket pocket, his hands trembling very slightly as he pulled out a small, beautifully crafted velvet box, his eyes filled with overwhelming love. He softly expressed that she had completely transformed his entirely empty, numbers-driven life into something incredibly rich, deeply meaningful, and wonderfully unpredictable, just like her amazing recipes. With a breathtakingly sincere smile, he gently opened the box, revealing a stunning vintage diamond ring that had belonged to his beloved late mother. He asked if she would do him the incredible honor of being his partner in life, promising to always protect her dreams and support her unyielding passion. Tears of profound joy cascaded down Sarah's cheeks as she enthusiastically whispered her absolute consent, completely overwhelmed by the beautiful, sweeping romance of the perfect moment. They shared a deep, incredibly tender kiss, sealing a beautiful promise that perfectly mirrored the resilient, enduring spirit of the beloved neighborhood they had successfully fought to save. 30 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye, deeply etching beautiful laugh lines into Sarah and Luke's faces, while their love only grew stronger. The bustling neighborhood square had become a famous, beloved landmark across the entire state, seamlessly bridging the vibrant energy of the modern city with its profound historical roots. Mary's Delights had beautifully evolved into a massive, highly respected culinary institution, effortlessly run by their adult children, Mia and Peter, who possessed their mother's magical touch. Sarah, now a revered elder in the vibrant community, spent her peaceful mornings teaching completely free baking classes to eager, underprivileged youth from the surrounding city districts. One crisp, particularly beautiful autumn morning, Luke completely surprised Sarah by organizing a massive, secret anniversary celebration right in the center of the bustling public square. Hundreds of incredibly grateful neighbors, loyal customers, and former students gathered together to honor the remarkable couple who had fiercely protected the very soul of their home. As Sarah looked around at the incredibly diverse, thriving community they had helped foster, her heart swelled with an overwhelming, indescribable sense of profound peace and accomplishment. The towering, majestic oak trees they had fiercely protected so many decades ago now cast incredibly wide, comforting shadows, sheltering a brand new generation of hopeful dreamers. Looking back on the incredibly turbulent journey of her youth, Sarah realized that the most difficult challenges had ultimately yielded the sweetest, most rewarding outcomes imaginable. Standing hand in hand with her beloved husband, she felt a deep, resonant connection to her ancestors, knowing she had successfully carried their enduring legacy forward. The fragrant scent of cinnamon and warm apples drifted gracefully from the busy bakery doors, serving as a constant, comforting reminder that true love and dedication never truly fade. It was a beautiful, living testament to the fact that when you fiercely protect what truly matters, the universe often rewards you with something infinitely greater. Life constantly presents us with immense, seemingly insurmountable forces that threaten to completely erase the quiet, comforting traditions we hold deeply within our hearts. When progress blindly marches forward, it is incredibly easy to feel entirely powerless, simply surrendering our precious history to the cold, calculating demands of the modern world. However, true wisdom reveals that the absolute strongest defense against erasure is not building a rigid wall, but rather extending a brave, compassionate hand toward meaningful compromise. By fiercely protecting our core values, while maintaining an open, generous spirit, we can successfully guide inevitable change to respect and honor the beautiful foundations of our past. True wealth is never found in ruthless corporate expansion or isolated victories, but in the vibrant, interconnected communities we passionately build, and the timeless love we freely share. The greatest legacy we can possibly leave behind is a world where the quiet, enduring wisdom of yesterday effortlessly nourishes the brilliant, boundless potential of tomorrow.